I told him it meant nothing, and by morning he'd packed every trace of us into boxes. Everyone at Barrett and Associates thought Greg and I had the perfect marriage. 15 years together, 2 daughters, the Colonial in Westfield, with the breakfast nook I'd fallen in love with at first sight. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, the kind of suburban dream I'd mocked in my 20s but desperately wanted by 30. We were the couple who still held hands at company picnics, who slow danced at the holiday party, while others stood awkwardly by the punch bowl nursing warm Chardonnay. "You two make me believe in love," Janine from accounting said at last year's summer barbecue, watching Greg flip burgers while I distributed paper plates. "Seriously, my husband won't even come to these things anymore. Says he sees enough of my coworkers during tax season." I squeezed Greg's shoulder, felt the familiar warmth of his Penn State t-shirt, the one with the hole near the collar that I kept threatening to throw out but secretly loved. It smelled like him, Tide and Old Spice, and something indefinably safe. "We're lucky," I said, meaning it, believing it, selling it to myself as much as to Janine. We'd met at this same company, back when it was just Barrett Financial in a strip mall off Route 22, squeezed between a nail salon and a Subway that always smelled like yeast. Greg in IT, me in marketing, both fresh out of college and playing at being adults. He'd fixed my computer on my 3rd day, a virus from downloading fonts I wasn't supposed to have, and instead of making me feel stupid, he'd shown me how to do it safely. "Comic Sans?" he'd teased, looking at my screen. "That's a fireable offense?" "It's ironic," I'd protested, already charmed by his crooked smile. "Sure it is. Next you'll tell me you actually like pumpkin spice lattes." I do actually, basic and proud. Our first date was happy hour nachos at Chili's, talking until they turned the lights up and started stacking chairs around us. He told me about growing up in Allentown, oldest of 4, how he'd started coding at 12 on a computer held together with duct tape. I told him about my parents' divorce, my semester in Barcelona, my secret dream of writing a novel someday. I knew by the second margarita that I'd marry him. He was steady, funny in a quiet way, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and fixed your computer without making you feel stupid about breaking it in the first place. 15 years later, he still brought me coffee every morning. Vanilla latte, extra foam, in the travel mug Emma had made at pottery camp. Purple clay with "World's Okayest Mom" painted in wobbly letters. We had our routines down to a science, morning kisses that tasted like Crest, daycare drop-off negotiations conducted via text, whose turn to grab milk on the way home. Bedtime stories and bath schedules and Saturday morning pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, though the ears never quite matched. "Mommy, why don't you and Daddy go on dates anymore?" Sophia asked one night, 7 years old and too observant for comfort. She was braiding her American Girl doll's hair, a skill I'd never mastered but she'd learned from YouTube. "We do, baby. We went to dinner last month for Daddy's birthday." "That was 3 months ago," she corrected, because of course she remembered. "And you were on your phone the whole time. Madison's parents have date night every Friday. They get a babysitter and everything." Greg and I exchanged glances over her head. When had 3 months passed without us noticing? When had date night become another item on the to-do list we never quite got to? "Work's been crazy," I explained, tucking her in, smoothing the unicorn comforter she'd picked out last Christmas. "But you're right. Mommy and Daddy need more dates." "Promise?" "Promise." But promises were easier made in the soft light of a child's bedroom than kept in the harsh fluorescence of real life. Work was always crazy. Barrett and Associates had exploded from 20 employees to 200, spawning offices in Newark and Trenton. Talks of Philadelphia next. I'd climbed from marketing coordinator to VP of Strategic Communications, a title that sounded impressive at dinner parties, but mostly meant I lived in conference rooms and survived on kind bars and lukewarm coffee that tasted like disappointment. Greg had stayed in IT, content to solve problems from his basement office, home by 5:30 every night. He'd turned down 3 promotions because they'd mean travel, time away from the girls. He didn't understand the pull of ambition, the high of landing a major client, the adrenaline of a perfectly executed campaign that made phones ring and invoices multiply. "You know you don't have to prove anything, right?" he said one night as I typed furiously on my laptop, Q3 reports due by morning. The remains of Chinese takeout congealed beside me, Kung Pao chicken, extra spicy, my standing Thursday order. "We're fine, more than fine. The girls need you more than Barrett needs another billable hour." "I know," I lied, not looking up from the screen where numbers danced and client satisfaction scores mocked me. "Just this one project, then things will calm down." "You said that about the Morrison campaign and the healthcare rebrand and, Greg, please, not tonight." He sighed, kissed the top of my head. When had that become our only form of physical affection? And headed upstairs. I heard the TV turn on, some sports thing that would put him to sleep within minutes. Later, I'd slip into bed beside him, careful not to wake him, and wonder when we'd become strangers who happened to share a mortgage. But things never calmed down. There was always another project, another client, another fire to put out. The Pemberton acquisition that needed messaging, the non-profit that wanted a complete rebrand but had no budget, the pharmaceutical company swimming in bad press that needed us to perform miracles. And somewhere between the strategy meetings and the soccer practices, between the quarterly reports and the parent-teacher conferences, Greg and I became roommates who happened to share children. We still functioned, still did Sunday dinners with his parents, still remembered anniversaries with flowers from the grocery store and cards from CVS. Still had sex on a schedule that would have horrified our younger selves. First Saturday of the month, after the kids were asleep. 15 minutes of muscle memory masquerading as intimacy. We were Facebook official, Instagram worthy, the couple everyone assumed was solid because we'd been together so long. Duration mistaken for depth, habit confused with happiness. I told myself it was normal, that all marriages settled into routine after kids and mortgages and the daily grind of adulting. That the flutter in my stomach when Greg smiled was just indigestion, not extinction. That wanting more was selfish when we already had enough. But at night, after everyone was asleep, I'd stand in our kitchen, granite countertops we'd saved for, backsplash I'd agonized over for weeks, and feel like I was suffocating in my own life. This beautiful, blessed, boring life that looked perfect from the outside and felt like drowning from within. The new accounts team arrived in January like a tornado in Italian suits. Barrett had poached them from our biggest competitor, a coup that had us all buzzing with excitement and terror. Fresh blood, new ideas, a chance to level up or be left behind. Adrian Chen was their lead, all sharp angles and sharper wit, the kind of presence that made you check your teeth for spinach and wish you'd worn your better blazer, the theory one that actually fit properly instead of the Ann Taylor that pulled at the shoulders. He commanded rooms without trying, turned budget meetings into TED Talks, made spreadsheets sound sexy. Yale undergrad, Wharton MBA, the kind of resume that made you wonder what he was doing in New Jersey. "Impressive deck," he said after my first presentation to the new team, cornering me by the coffee machine. The good one, not the Keurig in the break room, but the La Marzocco that Barrett had installed to seem cutting edge. "But you're playing it too safe. Your ideas are bigger than your slides." "Excuse me?" I clutched my coffee cup, suddenly aware of the chip in my manicure, the fact that my roots were showing. "The Morrison campaign. You pitched it like an apology when it's actually revolutionary. Own your brilliance, Rebecca. Stop asking for permission to be exceptional." Nobody had called me brilliant in years. Greg called me beautiful when he remembered to look up from his fantasy football app. My daughters called me mommy, usually followed by requests for snacks or homework help. My team called me boss, sometimes to my face. But brilliant? That was new, intoxicating, dangerous. "Thanks," I managed, trying not to stare at how his suit fit, how his watch caught the light. "I'll keep that in mind." "Do more than that." He smiled, and I noticed his eyes were the color of espresso, which was a ridiculous thing to notice about a coworker. Have dinner with me Thursday. We'll workshop your presentation style. I have some techniques that might help. I should have said no. Should have mentioned Greg, the girls, the line we weren't supposed to cross. Should have remembered that I was 41, not 21, that I had stretch marks and a mortgage and a daughter who needed help with algebra. Instead, okay. Perfect. Nobu at 7, unless you're one of those people who doesn't eat sushi? I eat everything, I said, then immediately regretted how that sounded. Good to know. Another smile. A wink, maybe, or did I imagine that? See you Thursday, Rebecca. I floated back to my office, closed the door, and stared at my reflection in the black computer screen. When was the last time someone had winked at me? When was the last time I'd felt my pulse race from something other than too much caffeine? Thursday came too fast and not fast enough. I told Greg I had a client dinner, which was technically true if you stretched the definition of client. Wore my good dress, the black theory that I'd bought for last year's gala and hadn't worn since. Spent 40 minutes on my hair, trying to look like I hadn't tried. You look nice, Greg said absently, Xbox controller in hand. Henderson's a lucky guy. What? The client, Henderson, from the email you forwarded about dinner? I'd forwarded no such email, but he was already back in his game, shooting zombies or building civilizations or whatever middle-aged men did to feel alive. Right, Henderson. Thanks. Dinner was at a restaurant I'd never been to, the kind where water came in blue bottles and the waiter described each dish like poetry. Adrian ordered for us both, presumptuous but somehow charming, and spent 3 hours dissecting not just my presentation style but my entire career trajectory. You're holding yourself back, he said over deconstructed tiramisu that looked more like art than dessert. Playing the supporting role in your own life. When did you decide you weren't the protagonist? When I had kids? I offered, trying for humor but landing on truth. Bullshit. Plenty of mothers run the world. Sheryl Sandberg, Indra Nooyi, that woman who runs Germany. Angela Merkel. Exactly. You think she's at home making Mickey Mouse pancakes? How did you know about the pancakes? You mentioned it in the break room. You remember things about people who interest you. He leaned forward, and I caught his cologne. Tom Ford, maybe. Something complex and adult. You interest me, Rebecca. I drove home tipsy on wine and attention. Found Greg asleep on the couch with Emma's science project scattered around him. A volcano we'd promised to help with, but I'd forgotten. Again. Mount Vesuvius in papier-mâché, waiting to erupt. How's that for symbolism? Guilt and resentment twisted together in my stomach. Why was he the default parent? When had I become the guest star in my own family? But also, why couldn't he have waited up? Why didn't he ask about my night? When did we stop being curious about each other? Where were you? He asked the next morning, scrambling eggs while I nursed a hangover disguised as exhaustion. Work dinner, I texted. At 11 p.m., after I'd already put the girls to bed and figured out the volcano thing solo. Did you know Emma's presenting today? She was nervous. Of course I knew, I lied, adding another brick to the wall between us. Adrian needed to go over the Morrison pitch. Adrian? He turned, spatula in hand. That's the 3rd time this week you've mentioned him. He's the new accounts lead. We have to work together. Right. He turned back to the eggs, shoulders tense. Just remember you have a team here too. Are you jealous? The question slipped out, accusatory and hopeful. Should I be? Don't be ridiculous. But the seed was planted, in both of us. Greg started paying attention. When I came home, who I texted, how often Adrian's name came up. And I started hiding things, deleting texts, creating elaborate cover stories, buying new lingerie that Greg would never see. Adrian and I fell into a pattern. Coffee that ran long, lunch meetings that required wine. Strategy sessions scheduled after everyone else had gone home. We were always working, technically. Presentations and proposals scattered between us like camouflage. But the real conversation happened in the spaces between bullet points, in the way he looked at me like I was fascinating instead of familiar. "Tell me something true," he said one night, both of us 3 drinks deep at the hotel bar after a client presentation in Princeton. "I used to want to be a writer," I admitted. "Fiction. Had a novel half finished before Emma was born." "What happened to it?" "Same thing that happens to all dreams when you have kids. It went in a drawer and stayed there." "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "No, it's not. It's life. It's choices. It's growing up." "It's giving up." He signaled for another round. "What was it about?" "A woman who disappears, just walks out of her life one day and starts over somewhere else." "Autobiography? Fantasy?" "Doesn't have to be." The kiss happened in the conference room 3 weeks later. Cliché location, inevitable outcome. 2 months of charged glances and loaded conversations, of working dinners that had nothing to do with work, of text messages that started professional and devolved into something else entirely. We were reviewing the Morrison presentation one last time. Just the 2 of us, the office empty, except for the cleaning crew. His hand brushed mine, reaching for the same pen. Time stopped. Breath held. And then we were kissing like teenagers, like idiots, like people who'd forgotten they had everything to lose. He pressed me against the whiteboard where we'd mapped out campaign strategies, and I tasted ambition and betrayal and 3 months of accumulated want. My wedding ring caught the light from the hallway, sending little rainbows across the wall like a disco ball of guilt. "We can't," I whispered, even as I pulled him closer. "We already are." And he was right. We'd crossed the line weeks ago, maybe that first night at Nobu. Everything since had been foreplay disguised as friendship, emotional infidelity with a professional veneer. The kiss just made it official. The affair lasted 4 months, 16 weeks of conference room encounters and business trips that required separate rooms, but only used one. Hotel bars in Princeton and Morristown. That Marriott by the airport where they never asked questions. I became an expert in deception. Sephora samples to mask his cologne, receipts destroyed with the efficiency of a mob lawyer, a Google Calendar so complex even I sometimes believed the lies. Client development, I'd tell Greg. Networking event, strategy session, coffee with Henderson. Poor fictional Henderson, who covered for so many sins. "Working late again?" Greg would ask, and I'd hear the resignation in his voice, the defeat. He'd stopped fighting, stopped asking follow-up questions, just accepted that I was choosing Barrett over bedtime stories, choosing ambition over anniversary dinners. "Big campaign, you know how it is." "I really don't anymore." The lying corroded me from inside. Acid reflux became my constant companion. I'd catch myself staring at Greg across the breakfast table, this good man who'd loved me since I was 22 and stupid, who built Emma's volcano and French-braided Sophia's hair because YouTube taught him how. He'd gained weight, yeah, and his idea of romance was letting me pick the Netflix show. But he was good, solid, the kind of man who'd never make me check my credit card statements or wonder where he was at midnight. He deserved better. They all did. But I couldn't stop. Adrian made me feel like the woman I'd meant to become before mortgages and meal planning turned me into someone I didn't recognize. With him, I was sharp and vital and worth pursuing across a crowded room. With him, I wasn't somebody's mother or wife or household manager. I was just Rebecca, brilliant and desired and dangerous. "Leave him," Adrian said one afternoon in his office, door locked, blinds drawn. April sunlight slanted through anyway, highlighting the mess we'd made of his desk. "We're good together. You know we are." "It's not that simple. The girls will adjust, kids are resilient, and they'll have a mother who's actually present instead of going through the motions." "I'm present." "Are you? When's Sophia's recital?" I blanked. Thursday? Friday? Greg had it in his phone. Greg always had it in his phone. He was the keeper of schedules, the rememberer of permission slips, the one who knew which twin had violin and which had viola. Exactly. Adrian traced my collarbone with his finger, following the path of my necklace, the one Greg had given me for our 10th anniversary. You're living half a life, Rebecca. Choose whole. Is that what you're offering? A whole life? I sat up, adjusting my skirt. You've never even met my kids. You don't know their middle names or their favorite colors, or how Emma needs exactly 3 stories before bed while Sophia only wants 1. I could learn. Could you? Could you really sit through Sunday dinners with my in-laws? Could you handle Sophia's anxiety or Emma's perfectionism? Could you do Common Core math and Disney World and parent-teacher conferences where they use words like spirited when they mean pain in the ass? With you? Yes. He sounded so sure, so confident. Like a man who'd never been woken at 3 a.m. by a vomiting child or spent Saturday mornings at swim meets that smelled like chlorine and broken dreams. Like someone who thought love was enough, who didn't understand that marriage was mostly logistics and compromise, and choosing the same person even when they bored you. I need time, I said, to think, to figure out how to... Take all the time you need. He kissed me, soft and certain. I'm not going anywhere. But time was the one thing I didn't have. The exposure came through the stupidest possible way. Not a lipstick stain or a suspicious credit card charge, but a pocket dial. My phone, calling Greg while Adrian and I were in what we thought was an empty office, discussing plans for Chicago. Except we weren't really discussing Chicago. I found out when I got home at 10:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I'd checked it in the driveway, calculating how late was too late to still be believable. Greg was sitting at the kitchen table with my phone in front of him like evidence, which it was. 17 minutes, he said quietly. That's how long you called me. Want to know what I heard? My stomach dropped. Greg? I heard my wife planning a weekend away with another man. I heard laughing. I heard sounds. His voice broke. In my head, I kept thinking it had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe you were watching a movie. Maybe it was a client thing. Right up until I heard you say his name. I can explain. Please don't. He stood, and I noticed he was wearing the Penn State shirt, the one with the hole near the collar. Had he been wearing it this morning? I couldn't remember. When had I stopped noticing my husband? I've called my sister. I'll stay there tonight. We'll figure out the details later. What about the girls? I told them Daddy has to help Aunt Carol with something. They're asleep. Sophia had a nightmare about sharks, but I handled it, like I handle everything. The bitterness in his voice was new, sharp. Try not to wake them when you shower. You smell like him. Greg, please. We can talk about this. We can go to counseling. We can... Stop. He held up his hand. Just stop. For once in your life, Rebecca, just stop talking. The door closed with devastating softness. No slam, no scene. Just the quiet end of everything I'd built and destroyed. I stood in our kitchen, my kitchen, though not for much longer, and listened to his car pull away. The dishwasher hummed, the clock ticked, normal sounds in a house that would never be normal again. Greg filed for divorce within a week, efficient as always, even in heartbreak. He'd done his research, found a mediator, drafted a custody proposal that was more than fair. Every other weekend and Wednesday nights for me. Child support calculated to the penny. The house would be his. The girls needed stability, and I couldn't afford it alone anyway. Not on one income. Not with what was coming. This seems fast, I said stupidly, staring at the paperwork in the mediator's beige office that smelled like coffee and broken dreams. 4 months of you fucking another man feels pretty long from my end, he replied. The first and only time I'd heard him use that word. It sat between us like a loaded gun. Greg, please don't. Whatever you're about to say, that it didn't mean anything, that you're sorry, that you still love me, just don't. Have that much respect for me at least. Adrian lasted exactly 2 weeks post-separation. Once the secrecy was gone, so was the thrill. I was no longer the mysterious married woman, but a cliché, the executive who blew up her marriage for an office affair. The gossip spread through Barrett and Associates like spilled coffee, staining everything it touched. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Meetings suddenly didn't require my attendance. Clients requested new account managers. "I think we should cool things off," Adrian said over drinks at the same restaurant where it all began. He wouldn't meet my eyes, suddenly fascinated by his whiskey. "The dynamic has shifted." "The dynamic?" I laughed, bitter and too loud. The couple at the next table glanced over. "You told me to choose whole. I chose." "I didn't expect you to actually leave him." He signaled for the check, already done with this conversation. "With me. I thought we were having fun." "Fun?" The word tasted like battery acid. "I destroyed my family for fun?" "That was your choice, Rebecca. Own it." "You said you loved me." "I said a lot of things." He stood, threw cash on the table. "So did you. That's what people do in affairs. They say things." He was gone by the next quarter, headhunted by a firm in Boston. I heard through Janine that he was dating someone from legal, 28 and childless. Uncomplicated. A girl who understood that workplace affairs were for fun, not for keeps. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Fairbrook Gardens, the kind of complex that called itself luxury because it had a gym no one used and a pool that closed at 8 p.m. Everything was beige. Walls, carpet, future. The walls were thin. I could hear my neighbors' lives. Their arguments about money, their makeup sex, their children who weren't mine every other weekend. "Why don't we live with you all the time?" Sophia asked during my first custody weekend, her dinosaur backpack looking wrong against my beige couch. She'd insisted on bringing all her stuffed animals like she was moving in, and it broke my heart. "Because Daddy's house is your real home. This is just where Mommy stays sometimes." "Like a hotel?" "Sort of, baby." "I don't like hotels. They smell weird and the pillows are wrong." Neither did I. Everything about the apartment felt temporary, like I was waiting for my real life to resume. But this was my real life. Takeout containers and empty Saturdays. Work that no longer thrilled because there was no one to rush home from. Wine bottles that accumulated too quickly. Netflix passwords I didn't have to share. The partners at Barrett were professionally sympathetic but personally distant. Water cooler conversations stopped when I approached. Client dinners became team efforts that somehow didn't require my presence. My brilliant ideas were suddenly interesting, but not quite right for our brand. "You might want to consider a fresh start," Richard Barrett himself suggested during my annual review. We sat in his corner office, the one I'd coveted for years, and I realized I'd never make it there now. Sometimes a change of scenery helps everyone move forward. I knew a termination negotiation when I heard one. 6-month severance, glowing recommendations, a quiet exit that let everyone save face. A standard NDA that meant I couldn't badmouth the company that had been my life for 15 years. I took it. What choice did I have? "It's for the best," Janine said at my goodbye drinks, which were sparsely attended and ended by 8. "Fresh starts, you know? And hey, at least you went for it. Most of us just fantasize about the hot new guy." "Yeah," I agreed, downing my wine. "Living the dream." The job search was humiliating. 15 years of experience, a portfolio of successful campaigns, references that sang my praises in carefully coded language. But word traveled in our industry. The brilliant Rebecca Mitchell, who imploded her marriage and her career for an office affair. Toxic, risky, not quite the right cultural fit. "We're looking for someone more stable," one interviewer said, not unkindly. "Your work is impressive, but we're a family company. Values matter here." I wanted to scream that I had values, that I'd been a room mother and a PTA treasurer and a soccer mom who brought orange slices. But those weren't my titles anymore. Now I was the cautionary tale, the woman who'd had it all and thrown it away for conference room quickies and hotel bar lies. I finally landed at a small firm in Parsippany, 30 minutes further from the girls, doing work I could have done fresh out of college. Entry-level campaigns for local businesses, dentists and dry cleaners, and the kind of restaurants that still thought Comic Sans was acceptable. My boss was 12 years younger and called me Becky, no matter how many times I corrected her. "At least you have weekends free," she chirped when I mentioned missing another school event. "Silver lining, more time for self-care." But weekends were the worst. 48 hours of nothing when it wasn't my custody time. 48 hours of wondering what my daughters were doing, who was braiding their hair, whether they missed me or were relieved to be in their stable home with their stable parent. I joined a gym, took up pottery, volunteered at the library, anything to fill the hours that used to disappear in a blur of soccer games and birthday parties and family trips to Target where we'd spend $200 on nothing and everything. Sometimes I drove past the house. Our house, their house, especially on Sunday mornings. I knew the routine, Greg making Mickey Mouse pancakes while the girls watched cartoons in their pajamas. The shapes were probably perfect now. He'd had time to practice, to become the kind of parent who remembered permission slips and favorite colors, and which daughter needed 3 stories and which needed 1. The final twist came at Emma's spring concert. I almost missed it. Greg had texted the wrong time, then corrected it, but I'd only seen the first message. Old habits. I slipped into the auditorium just as she took the stage for her violin solo, my work heels clicking too loudly on the linoleum. Every head turned, every parent judged. There goes the mother who chose spreadsheets over bedtime stories. There goes the cautionary tale. Greg was in the 3rd row with Sophia and a woman I didn't recognize. Blonde ponytail, cardigan over sundress, the kind of put-together that suggested meal plans and labeled containers and a Pinterest board for every occasion. She was filming Emma with Greg's phone, steady and sure, like she'd done it before. Like she belonged there. Emma played beautifully. When had she gotten so good? I remembered fighting about practice, bribing her with screen time too busy to actually listen. Now she commanded the stage, confident and radiant, my daughter who was becoming someone without me. The piece was complex, something with multiple movements, and she nailed every note. The audience erupted in applause, and she beamed, searching the crowd. Her eyes found Greg first, then the blonde woman, then, almost as an afterthought, me. "You made it," Greg said afterward in the hallway, neutral as Switzerland. He looked good. Had he been working out? The Penn State shirt had been replaced by an actual button-down. When had he learned to iron? "Barely. Hi, I'm Rebecca." I extended my hand to the woman, who took it with a firm shake. No wedding ring, but a silver bracelet that looked handmade, probably by one of the girls. "Melissa, I've heard a lot about you." Not mean, just factual. She had kind eyes, the sort that probably never looked at another woman's husband with intent. Emma was wonderful. "She's been practicing so hard," Greg added, and I caught the "we" implicit in his tone. "Mel's been helping her with the tough passages. She teaches at the conservatory." Of course she did. Of course this woman who fit seamlessly into my discarded life was everything I'd chosen not to be. Present, patient, prioritizing family over conference rooms and fictional Hendersons. "That's wonderful," I managed. "Emma, you were amazing. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom." She hugged me quickly, already pulling away. "Can we get ice cream? Melissa knows a place with lavender honey flavor." "It's a school night," I started, then caught myself. Not my call anymore, not my rules, not my life. But I'm sure Dad knows best. "Actually," Melissa said gently, "Emma, why don't you ask your mom if she'd like to join us? If that's okay with everyone?" I saw Greg tense, saw Emma's face cycle through emotions too complex for 11, saw Sophia suddenly become very interested in her shoes. The invitation hung there like a test no one wanted to take. "That's kind, but I have to get back," I lied. "Early morning, you guys have fun." The relief was palpable. They walked away, a unit that made sense, and I stood in the elementary school hallway, surrounded by children's art and inspirational posters about reaching for the stars, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's rent, completely alone. "Rebecca?" I turned to find Janine from accounting, her son trailing behind with a trumpet case. Still at Barrett, still married, still whole. "Oh, hi. I heard you landed somewhere new. How's it going?" "Great," I lied. "Really great. Fresh start, you know." She shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry about everything. I always thought you and Greg were—" "Perfect. I know. So did I." "Were you?" She asked it quietly, like she really wanted to know. "Perfect, I mean, before?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Had we been perfect? Or had we been comfortable? Had we been in love, or had we been in habit? Had I blown up something beautiful, or had I simply lit a match to show what was already burning? "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought being bored meant being broken. Turns out being bored just meant being married." "But Adrian was just a symptom. I was the disease." The parking lot was full of families heading home to homework and bedtime routines. Normal people living normal lives, finding extraordinary in the ordinary. I sat in my leased BMW. Another decision made in the Adrian fog, payments I could barely afford, and watched Greg's minivan pull away. When had he bought a minivan? When had practical become more important than pretty? When had my daughter's lives become a series of events I might or might not attend? I drove back to Fairbrook Gardens, past the Marriott where it all went wrong, past the office where I'd traded everything for nothing. My apartment smelled like the vanilla candle I burned to mask the emptiness, like the takeout Thai growing cold on my counter, like the choices that seemed so right in conference room lighting and looked so wrong in the harsh fluorescence of reality. My phone buzzed. Adrian, of all people. "In town for a conference. Drinks?" I stared at the message, at this man who'd cost me everything by offering me nothing, who'd called me brilliant when what I'd needed was to be called home, who'd made me feel alive when what I'd needed was to appreciate the life I already had. I started to type a response, delete, type again, delete, finally, no. Then I deleted his number, deleted our text history, deleted the photos I'd hidden in a locked folder, the ones that proved for 4 months I'd been someone's priority instead of someone's responsibility. I sat in the silence of my temporary life, wondering how many brilliantly stupid women sat in apartments just like mine, learning too late the difference between being desired and being loved. How many of us had traded good men for good times, had mistaken comfort for complacency, had thought the grass was greener only to discover it was astroturf. The vanilla candle flickered, casting shadows on my blank walls. No family photos here. Those lived on my phone, remnants of a life I'd documented but failed to appreciate. Somewhere across town, my real life was having dinner without me. Somewhere, Greg was helping with homework while Melissa loaded the dishwasher she'd probably organized properly, the kitchen warm with the chaos I'd found suffocating. I'd wanted to feel alive, mission accomplished. I felt everything, regret, loneliness, the particular shame of being a cliché. I felt the weight of empty weekends, and the ache of missed recitals, and the hollow victory of getting exactly what I'd thought I wanted. I just never realized how much living could feel like dying, how much freedom could feel like falling, how much finding yourself could feel like losing everything that mattered. The Thai food congealed on my counter. The candle burned down to nothing. And I sat in my luxury apartment that wasn't luxurious, planning a life that wasn't much of a life, wondering if Greg still made those lopsided Mickey Mouse pancakes and if my daughters still counted them as perfect.